Last time on Footprints in the Wilderness, the Jesuits under a growing threat.
From within because of the diseases, and from without because of the Iroquois attacks. So when ships were going downriver, the Iroquois attacked, and when they were going upriver, same thing.
Saint-René, near Georgian Bay, Canada. In 1642, this Jesuit mission to the Hurons was near collapse from disease and starvation, and a withering siege by the Hurons' sworn enemies, the Iroquois. Sillery, the Jesuit mission 900 miles to the east, just upriver from and protected by the French garrison at Quebec. Somehow, a relief expedition from here must traverse those 900 miles of Iroquois-infested wilderness, or the Jesuits' western mission would fall. In late July, with time running out, a lone priest arrived at Sillery to head that expedition. He was to become one of the most beloved saints of the Catholic Church, Jesuit Father Isaac Jogues. Volunteering to join the trip was 34-year-old René Goupil, a surgeon just 2 years outside his native France.
Cette expédition de Jogues et de Goupil vers la Huronie était une expédition considérable.
This expedition by Jogues and Goupil into the Huron country was an enormous undertaking. It would bring everything needed upriver, medicine, food, religious supplies for the priests, and it would have to last the mission for an entire year.
Et ceci pour une année.
On August 1st, 1642, the party made it to a site near Three Rivers. They camped and held a council. The oldest Native American among them stood up and addressed the group. My brothers, if I fall into the hands of the Iroquois, they may by dint of torture tear my soul from my body, but not from my heart this hope that after death I shall be happy. Jogues, keeping watch that first night, recorded that if anyone heard the sound of enemy paddles in the water or the whispering of painted bodies in the trees, they said nothing about it. We are on the north bank of the St. Lawrence, near the site of the ambush. The convoy traveling to St. Marie Mission was coming from our left, while the Iroquois hid in the dense growth along the shoreline. The convoy was carrying an enormous quantity of supplies for the Western Mission.
On comprend que les Iroquois voulaient tout capturer.
A fateful decision. The convoy stayed close to the shore to avoid the current. The French were armed and prepared to use force. They were Mohawk, one of the 6 tribes of the Iroquois Confederacy, possibly the fiercest.
La majorité des Hurons se sont sauvés dans les bois environnants.
Most of the Hurons managed to escape into the surrounding woods.
And then another attack came from across the river.
Knowing that the least valuable of their captives would probably be killed on the spot, Goupil urged Jogues to hear the confession of the eldest in their party.
So Jogues went over and heard his confession.
From the site of the capture, the Mohawk took their prisoners across the St. Lawrence to a place now known as the site of the death posters.
Nous sommes ici dans un lieu particulièrement privilégié, au bord du Richelieu.
We're in a very special place on the bank of the Mohawk or Richelieu River, near its juncture with the St. Lawrence. The Mohawk brought their captives here to divide up the plunder and also to determine their fates. Some of these unfortunates witnessed their own faces being drawn onto birch trees. These death posters were in black for those to be held captive, red for those condemned to die. Jogues and Goupil, for the moment, were spared. We can only imagine the terror of René Goupil and his companions in this place, their physical and emotional state. They must have simply put themselves into God's hands and said, "Come what may."
Adieu pour dire advienne que pourra.
Goupil and Jogues were put back into the canoes and ordered to paddle. Jogues refused and was astonished when Goupil immediately took up a paddle and began to row.
And he picked up the paddle, and if we're going someplace, I'll help you get there. It says something about forgiveness, doesn't it?
The trip to Iroquois country took the captives south up the Richelieu River to Lake Champlain, near the site where 25 years earlier, Champlain had shot dead an Iroquois chief. Now, joined by a second war party traveling north, the Iroquois would collect that debt. Given the distances in question and the time it would have taken to paddle against the current, it's almost certain that Jogues and Goupil spent the second night of captivity here. Nightfall on Lake Champlain in the hope of relief from torment. Instead, trials by fire. Jogues writes that he was staked to the ground while hot coals were dropped onto his bare chest. He notes that Goupil fared worse, but does not elaborate. From Lake Champlain to present-day Lake George, the captors drove their victims south, following the Mohawk River, to the village of St.Renatus, where they arrived towards evening on August 14th. This was to be the final destination of René Goupil. Today, it is known as Auriesville, and it is the site of Our Lady of Martyrs Shrine. Beth Lynch conducts special programs and tours of the site.
People visit here because they sense that it is holy ground. They came up this hill and ran the gauntlet. Father Isaac was the last in line so that he could receive some special treatment. René was before him and was so badly beaten that he had lost consciousness and sank to the ground. He had to be carried into the village. What we're looking at here is actually where the village of St.Renatus was. In our imagination, we can see this, that these battered prisoners, 20 of them or more, were paraded into this what's now a beautiful grassy area, at the time surrounded by the palisades.
Although they comprehended little of each other's native tongue, there was no need for words in the ritual that followed. Torture was, as Jogues said, a language spoken the world over.
If you were captured, you were certain, first of all, of being tortured. And it would be extended as long as possible, and it would be a group affair.
Goupil was first. Jogues was forced to watch his friends' beating and mutilation.
He repeated, as a way of removing himself from the pain, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph.
Then Jogues had a finger removed and was taunted with it.
Manger, Franchi! Manger!
The sight of his hands created a great deal of curiosity and reverence. The Queen of Austria, for instance, actually kissed them out of reverence, like he was a martyr. And the Pope gave a dispensation so that he could say Mass with what was left of them.
They survived. Not only the gauntlet, but these several days of torture there on the platform, day and night. They were survivors. They were strong men. Having survived that, they were enslaved. It was decided they would not be killed. They were given menial tasks to do. They were grinding corn, they were gathering firewood, chopping wood. Keep in mind that their hands were mutilated, they were starving, their wounds were infected, and still they got up and they did what they were told to do.
Granted this temporary reprieve, Jogues and Goupil tried to recuperate. Their possessions long since taken away, they used whatever was at hand to continue their religious devotion. A cross made of twigs, a rosary of leaves. Sensing his time was short, René begged Father Jogues to let him take the vows of the Jesuit order as a brother, and Jogues agreed. He told the astounded priest that whatever happened, he forgave his captors. Hearing of their plight, the Dutch governor, Corlaer, made an overture to his Iroquois friends for their release, but the Iroquois refused.
When Corlaer left, both Jogues and Goupil ran after him, asking them to do anything they could to get them away, get them out of this. They did not have a death wish. They did not want to be martyrs.
During their captivity, they weren't afraid to evangelize. They had come to New France to preach the gospel. And they were here as captives, but they considered it God's will. And so they were going to do what they believed they were sent to do.
Even if that meant doing things they had been warned not to do. In the longhouse into which Goupil was returned each night was an Iroquois boy, living with an elder. Whether because of the boy's gesture of kindness or because of the zeal for the cross of René Goupil, as Father Jogues later wrote, a bond between captor and captive was created and witnessed.
Habituellement, on dit que Goupil a été assassiné.
It is widely held that Goupil was killed because he made the sign of the cross over an infant.
Donc, c'était un geste chrétien, d'une manière
This, of course, is a Christian sign,
provocante d'une certaine façon.
one that could even be considered provocative in a way.
Il est vrai aussi, il ne faut pas être trop naïf.
But let's not be naive. The Dutch and the English, who were competing fiercely with the French for a foothold in Canada, told the Native Americans repeatedly that the sign of the cross made by Catholic priests was their way of taking possession of the soul of the Native Americans.
Les catholiques, c'était un moyen pour eux de prendre possession de l'âme des Indiens.
So this is what they understood when they saw René do this. This was some kind of a curse he was putting on this little boy. This was René Goupil's death warrant. They were given a certain degree of freedom, and after their chores were finished, they were allowed outside of the palisades, and they would come up to this hill, to this part of the property, to pray.
Français.
But this particular day, Jogues sensed, was different.
Méfiez-vous.
René Goupil voit sa fin prochaine.
René!
Jogues covered the body of his comrade with rocks beside a stream as a temporary grave, intending to return the next day to give him a proper burial. But a storm that night swept the body away. The grief-stricken priest searched in vain for him, writing, "I return to the place. I go again. I seek everywhere. And I myself go into the river up to my waist. So many tears that I shed into the torrent." The death of his companion left Jogues shaken and remorseful. Guarded by an old man, he went into the woods each day to gather firewood.
He's out gathering firewood, and perhaps he thinks that this is the wood that will be used to burn him the following day. And while all this is going on, he made about 70 converts. It's kind of incredible.
In spite of the conversions, Jogues finally decided that to remain with the Iroquois was tantamount to an act of suicide, so he fled, eventually making his way onto a ship bound for Europe. From the Brittany coast, he made his way to the Jesuit college at Rennes.
The story is a man knocks at the door of a Jesuit residence. And the door is opened, of course, and the rector is there. And he said, "Well, who are you?" And he said, "I'm looking for some food and some clothing. I just came from New France." He said, "Did you? Well, have you heard anything about Isaac Jogues? He was tortured and killed. And the news is all over France." And the man said, "Yes, I did hear of him. He is alive and at liberty. I am he."
For the next several months, Jogues was the toast of European royalty. They wanted to see for themselves what the so-called devil worshippers had done to him. But Jogues was less interested in displaying his scars than he was in telling the story of his comrade, René Goupil, whose fate still haunted him. Before leaving on his second, final trip to New France, he made sure the world would remember, faithfully writing down every event from memory. The Martyrs' Shrine at Midland, Ontario today flanks the Wye River next to St.René Mission, the mission René Goupil never got to. Beginning in the valley of the Loire,